Okay, guys, so your notes for today, since I'm not here, we're going to talk about four scientists that influenced Darwin. So these guys are pretty much a little bit older than Darwin. And the way I want you to attack it is I want you to go in and I'm going to give you the name of the scientist, and what did he study, and then what did Darwin, how did he use what that scientist came up with? Okay, so this first guy, his name is Thomas Malthus. Okay, Thomas Malthus, 1798. So he's pretty old. And what he did was he studied populations. Okay, how do populations battle for food and space and things like that? Okay, and basically that's what I want you to know about him. He studied populations. And then if you look at this picture, this is a train in India. And you can see that it wouldn't be a good place to live. A lot of people here. If these were wild animals, it probably would never happen like this, simply because they would be fighting each other, eating each other. But we're humans. But when you think of Rensselaer, look, we're pretty, lucky to live in a town where we have space, and we could live someplace like this where you have to fight to get on a train like that. And so if these were wild animals, this would not work, okay? And so Thomas Malthus studied the population. Now, right here, you're going to see here, natural selection is the force driving evolution, right? So the competition for space forces the organisms to evolve by natural selection. Let me get this off there for you. Okay, so if everybody on this train was, well, they're kind of competing for space, but they're not competing for food. And you can see that it wouldn't be a good situation. Okay, so the competition for space and food forces the organisms to evolve by nature. So that's what Charles Darwin came up with. Pretty cool. Now, the next scientist is James Hutton. Now, James Hutton, I studied him in college. He is the father of geology. Okay, father of geology. And he came up with this term called gradualism. Now, gradualism means that, to us, for you sitting in class, a minute might seem like a long time, but it's not. When we talk Earth time, geologic time, it changes geology-wise, happen extremely slow, and they're continuing to this day. In other words, there were earthquakes a billion years ago. There's earthquakes today. There's going to be earthquakes a billion years into the future. And so these changes, like mountains being formed, that's continuing every day. I know we know for a fact that Europe and North America are getting farther away each year, and we measure it, and it's like the distance that your fingernail would grow in 1 year. So it's like maybe about an inch. So since I've been alive, basically Europe and North America have probably widened out by about my height, 6 feet, and we can measure this. Okay, now what is cool is, Darwin figured out, wow, the Earth must be really, really old, really, really old. And so since the Earth is like 4.6 billion years old now that we know, this allowed for time for the organisms to evolve through natural selection and evolution. Now, you can see this lady here. She was the 48th oldest person to ever live. Now, probably that has changed. There's a picture over here to the left and what she looked like just before her death. And to us, that would be old. But compared to mountains, this lady is, she's not even a blip on the radar. Okay? So that is James Hutton. So remember, father of geology. Let me fix this. Make sure I don't goof up. Okay, next guy. John Baptiste Lamarck, 1809. This guy studied fossils. And he noticed that as time went on, some traits either disappeared or they were enhanced. Okay? So in the rock record, when he studied fossils and these layers, because we know that if there's a layer here, it's older than the layer sitting on top. That's common sense. A fifth grader knows that. That's the way it goes. And so he figured out that if a trait disappeared. So like maybe a fin was getting smaller or a leg bone was getting smaller. That animal was not using that at that time, and it was disappearing. Okay? And we talked about the giraffe over here. You can see, remember, he was the guy that kind of came up with the idea with the giraffe neck getting longer, even though we don't know that exactly that's how that happened. And so all species seem to be descendants from other species. So this is what Charles Darwin, he took away from what Jean-Baptiste Lamarck said. And basically you can think of this guy as the guy that coined the phrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. So for example, our pinkies, really our hands could function without a pinky or a little piggy toe. And so over time, if this guy is right, then these appendages here are going away. An appendix, which we know it used to be, we guess it used to be some kind of an organ that we don't use anymore, and now it's shriveled down to about the size of a finger, and it holds bacteria. And so like when we get sick and we get diarrhea, this puts back, the appendix puts back in the good bacteria in our system and helps flush it back in. And so that way we can recover faster. But in maybe 100,000 years, 200,000 years, we may not even have that. So Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Okay. Next one. Gregor Mendel. So here's Gregor Mendel. Remember, we talked about him. He's the father of genetics. And it helped explain the biological mechanism for evolution. Now, he lived in about 1850, so he was alive about the same time. I don't think they knew each other, but they were probably acquainted with each other's work, even though they didn't know. I've never read anything that they knew each other. But he lived in 1850. It's when he was doing his work. And basically, you already know what he did. It was he discovered how the traits seem to be passed from the parents to the children or their offspring. Okay, and remember, they discovered genes that are the packets of information that parents pass on their information to offspring. And so that was the biological mechanism for evolution, because eventually we would find out that these genes can be mutated, and that mutation is what creates different adaptations that may be beneficial or not. And so that's how Darwin kind of realized that adaptations can occur. Okay, so if went through it too fast, you can always stop it, replay it, but make sure you get these notes down. This is going to be important. This is going to keep us going, and we'll see you later.